So if you discount the first 20 years of your life, because that's when you're a child, and you think about the last 30 years since you were 20, actually the next 30 years, if you live till 80, then you're actually only halfway through your adult life. And if you live till like 100, you're not even halfway yet.
Love that. That's a positive mindset. That's creative mindset.
That's good, isn't it?
I love that. I'm joined today by the lovely Emma Henderson, MBE. Emma is an airline captain herself, actually just recently finished with EasyJet, having done most of her career there. But Emma, notably, apart from being one of the very, very few female captains in our industry, has also set up this incredible charity called Project Wingman, supporting the NHS staff during the COVID period, providing a first-class lounge for them to come in and to decompress and have an empathetic ear, basically, to help them overcome the incredibly difficult time, as it was for all of us. Really, they were in the face of danger. So Emma is just such a remarkable person, and we could be here for hours and hours and hours to talk about everything. But we're going to try and concentrate on how Emma's life has worked out through mindset and confidence, and some tips and tricks that Emma might have to offer us with that. So welcome, Emma.
Thanks, Ben. It's lovely to be here, and we already have spent hours chatting. Just since we first met, haven't we?
Haven't we just?
So, yeah. Which is great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, it just give us a little bit of a bio of your career with, you didn't even start flying airplanes until you were 3 children in, which I think is just such a brilliant story. So let's hear a little bit about how you got into it.
Well, I had a little bit of flying before that. I didn't know I was going to be a pilot. I thought I was going to be a corporate lawyer. And that's what I went off to university to do a history degree in order to then do a law conversion. I wasn't quite bright enough to do a law degree. But in my second year at university, I saw the advert for the University Air Squadron, and I joined Yorkshire University Air Squadron, which I know all pilots listening will agree is the best University Air Squadron in the country. There's no dispute about that. And so I spent 2 years flying. My first 2 years flying were actually there, and I went to Cranwell to do aptitude tests and things. But by then, I'd actually met, as always is the problem, you meet a boy and you fall in love. And basically I met, he's now been my husband for nearly 29 years. If he's really lucky, we'll get to 29 years. And I met Jim I was flying at Finningley, and I met him there, and we got married 11 days after I graduated, moved up here where I am now to the north of Scotland because he was posted to Kinloss and the Nimrod. And I didn't think I'd fly again. I just assumed that my flying days were over, and had the kids, built a house. And a year after we moved into the house, the Air Force, as it often does, said, why don't you go and live in New Zealand for 3.5 years? So off we went with our 20-month-old, our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old to the other side of the world, where we didn't know anyone apart from my brother and his wife, who lived a couple of hours north of us in Auckland. And we had 3.5 years there. It was while I was there that Jim, basically, he was the one, it's his fault. He was the one who said, if you stop smoking, because I was basically a overweight, having had 3 children in 3 years, lazy, drinking smoker, and quite proud of it. And he said, if you stop smoking, the money you save in pounds will pay in New Zealand dollars for you to get your PPL. And so I said, okay, then I'll do that. And he said, but you've got to stop smoking for 6 weeks before you can take your first flight. And he smoked as well, and we both stopped. And so that I didn't become even bigger, I took up triathlons, because I was like, well, I can't get fat, but I can't run. So I thought if I mix running, swimming and cycling up together, then that way I won't get injured. So I started doing that, and took my first flying lesson 6 weeks later and never looked back. And I came back from New Zealand 3.5 years later as a fully qualified commercial pilot, ready to go with my JAR ATPL exams, which I sat over 6 months when I first got back to the UK, and became an instructor. I got a scholarship from what was then the Guild of Air Pilots and Air Navigators to become a flying instructor. So I did that for 3 years, came back up to Kinloss, and then I was literally in the right place at the right time for EasyJet, who took on 12 already qualified pilots who were already working rather than the standard kind of cadet. And I was one of them. So I started flying for EasyJet, which was the airline I had always wanted to fly for if I was going to go back flying again. And I started working with them at Stansted in 2009.
Wow, 2009. And when did you, just remind me when you finished with them?
I took voluntary redundancy in September 2020.
Okay, so you did a good 11 years. That's a good stretch. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, it was, I think it was about January 2009 to, so 11 or 12 years. And I'd still be there now if it wasn't for COVID.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? It's really,
I never thought that I would stop flying again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're all still very young. You were just telling me we're similar age, you and I. We're only halfway through our adult life, which I thought was a really positive mindset. But that's a good link into mindset, isn't it? Really, that I've got a couple of friends of mine who did start flying post children, and I look back at my life. I didn't start till I was 25, but I didn't have any encumbrances. I only had responsibility for myself, and I found that hard enough. I really put 110% effort into it. And I think, how the hell do you do that? You know, you're a wife, you got 3 children. Obviously you just set yourself a target and went for it, and there was no question. I mean, how did you decide that was what you wanted to do?
It's funny that, because my father-in-law is adamant that he thinks that my biggest single achievement ever was to become a qualified pilot with 3 small children in tow. And I've never looked at it as being typical me. I've never looked at it as being that significant, because I just got on and did it. And, we were very young when we had the children. And I look back at everything we did then, actually, and think, why did we think we could build a house when we had 2 children and another one on the way? Yeah. Why did we think that was a good idea? Yeah. And none of them died, which was really amazing. But, I think that when you're young like that, I mean, of course, now, if somebody said to me at the age of 51 in a couple of days' time, if somebody said to me, well, go and learn to be a pilot with a 20-month-old, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, I'd just go, that was so ridiculous. There's no way I'd have time to do that. And if somebody said, well, why don't you have a baby in the middle of a house build? Or if one of my children said they were going to build a house and they had 2 children and one on the way, I would say what my in-laws said and say, don't, it's bloody ridiculous. You can't do that. But of course, every time somebody told me I couldn't do something, and it's still the same now, if somebody says to me I can't do something, that's my trigger to go and do it. And when we were in New Zealand and I needed to lose weight, I said, well, what about this running thing then? How about a half marathon? And my next door neighbour, who was a personal trainer, said, you can never train to run a half marathon from scratch in 6 months. And I was like, now I will. And I ran the Auckland Half Marathon 6 months later in 2 hours 15, which I was quite proud of.
That's very good.
I was less proud of the fact that the following year I did the same thing in exactly the same time. I was like, I thought you were supposed to improve and get faster. But
yeah.
So I just got on and did it. And I dropped the children off at school or nursery, and then I'd go flying, and then I'd come back and pick them up. So.
I mean, it's really inspirational, I think. And again, we are in our 50s, and we look back and think, how the hell did we do that? But this is the thing I think that a lot of us are struggling with, is purpose in life. Of course, the main purpose of life for so many years was just simply to survive. So death was around the corner at any second. We'd die of a toothache until very recently, until penicillin was invented. So that was the focus. Now we have relative luxury, and we have so many choices, but we don't actually know what we're capable of until we're either put in that situation, in a war situation or a health situation or a tragedy with losing a family member or something, or actually just to force ourselves to put ourselves in that situation. And I think that's the message we need to be promoting now, is finding something that we are motivated to do. I can see what you're saying, is that when someone tells you can't do it, then you're going to do it. But the point is that you had an idea to do it in the first place. So the motivation, you've got the vision, You've got the plan, the destination ahead. You've got the motivation from someone telling you can't do it, but also knowing that you want to prove it to yourself. No doubt, not because you want to stick two fingers up at other people, because you love the idea of it. And that's why you're not a tough son of a bitch. You're incredibly kind and thoughtful, but you're also very, very determined. And I think that's a unique mix.
I am very determined, and I am aware of the fact that that is a good thing, because it means I want to try new things all the time. And even now, just because I'm nearly halfway through my adult life, maybe, it doesn't mean I'm going to stop looking for things. So I was literally scrolling through Instagram this morning and saw this artist, I think in Australia, he does like acrylic pouring. And I was watching this going, I don't really like what you produce, but my God, that looks exciting. I think I might try that.
Yeah, good.
So
absolutely.
That's a great thing but it's a great thing in lots of ways, because I'm inquisitive. I always want to know what's behind the walls. I'm never satisfied with, that's what the wall looks like. I'm like, yeah, but where's the wiring? And where does the computer wires run? And what's the wall built of in the first place? And which I think is handy, having built a house.
Yes.
But the problem with that is I have to be careful, because if you are the child of someone like me, it's very difficult to try things without me sitting down and going, oh, I can do that. Because I've tried so many things and I've done so many things. And my children have said to me, it's really annoying, because, they would have piano lessons, and I've played since I was 4. So I would just sit down, no, you do it like this. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily take over, but if they said, can you show me how to do something? I would show them how to do it. And then they'd say, oh, do you know what? I'll never be as good as you. So they'll give up. So you have to be really careful not to then squash the ambition of your children, because, I realise I am a very capable person. But I think part of that is also, and I'm a nightmare to live with, because I've always got my head in another direction, and I'm like, oh, look, there's a squirrel. And, so I think that can be very difficult sometimes.
Brilliant.
And I acknowledge that, but it's not going to change. It doesn't change who I am. But I do have to be careful around my children when they say they want to try something new, and they're adults now. If it's something I've ever done before, I won't now say to them, oh, I've done that, because they'll be like, oh, do you know what? There's no point in me trying. Yeah. But also I don't talk about the things I'm no good at. I don't ever tell you that I'm rubbish at golf, because I just can't even hit a ball. I'll never play golf because I know I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I tend to sack off the things I know I'm bad at.
Yeah. Yeah. But actually that's a great message. And actually one of your core values is humility and humour, which you have in absolute abundance. And I think you're right. So if we go into the aviation world, where it's intrinsically interesting to people, and people will say, wow, you're a pilot, kind of thing. And I think, well, yeah, thank you, but that's not me. I'm not a wow. I struggled at school, never thought I was particularly that intelligent. IQ was the whole measurement of whether you're going to be successful in life, and I never measured up to that. I could throw cricket balls and rugby balls around and enjoyed that, and run around and climb trees, but you're never really going to be successful. So it's really not a wow thing. It's making that decision to do something and just giving it a bloody good crack. And I think, like you, I'm an enthusiast. I run through the Enneagram personality testing, which has 9 personality types. And I come out at the moment as type 7, which is the enthusiast. So love to try lots of different things. The problem, of course, is being distracted and a bit scattered and not sticking to one and moving on to the next. But I think you've got a great story about how you started in aviation, but also your captaincy, your upgrade to captaincy, because you didn't get through that. And I think this is the way we offer to our children, to other people, is that here's a story about how I struggled and how did I get through it. It's not about me being any expert or better than anybody else. I just kept going. So yeah, tell us about that, because that's a very good story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the children really helped me get through that as well, because I failed my initial command course, or command course 1, as I name it, because it sounds like Air Force 1, which is better than saying I failed the first one. So there's a little bit of a backstory to it, which is that, and I was like you at school, by the way. I was not super brainy, but I worked hard. And I didn't have a lot of friends at school. And I was talking to someone about this yesterday. And I think if I looked back at sort of 13, 14-year-old me, I probably wouldn't be friends with me either. I was quite awkward and it made me a bit of a knob. So, and I'm happy to take ownership of that, you know.
Yeah.
Hopefully I'm less of one now because I do have friends. But I liked school, but I didn't understand why people didn't want to learn there. I couldn't cope with people messing around in class and stuff. I was like, but this is a learning environment and I love it. So I never failed anything until, I never failed anything. I worked hard enough to pass everything that I needed to do. So when I got to the point where I had been at EasyJet for 4 years and I had entered the command process, because I'd been there I'd got 1,000 hours of flying and instructing time before I went to EasyJet. And so 4 years later, I was in the command process, and everybody's expectation, including mine, was that by the following summer, I'd be on a command course. And towards the end of that year, I just started to feel really tired. And it's not unusual for airline pilots, especially at low-cost airlines, to feel tired because, it's hard to maintain. Every pilot listening will understand, it's very hard to maintain decent sleep and quality of sleep when you're up at 3 o'clock one week and not back till 3 o'clock the next week. So I really didn't pay much attention to it. And then I got an ache in my right arm, which I put down to, in the Airbus, we used to have 4 heavy manuals that were the route charts, the route manuals. And you had to turn around behind the back of your seat to get them out of this pocket and lift them up like this. So it's the top of my arm that was aching. So I thought, that's why that's aching. That's easy. But it started to become obvious that there was something wrong. And I started to fall over for no reason, went for lots of tests. And all the time I was going through the command process and the command assessments and the interviews and all the rest of it. And eventually I had my medical pulled because my doctor wanted to send me to a neurologist because she thought I had multiple sclerosis.
Yeah, blimey.
And so, that was it. Game over, lost my medical. And it was almost a relief because I was really starting to struggle at work. Can't believe, looking back, that I actually thought it was okay to go flying when, sometimes my legs would stop working. It never happened at work. It was always when I was playing tennis or running or something. So I kind of associated it with exercise. So I lost my medical, and of course that was me out of the process. And I had this interview with my base captain, and he said, right, this is what happens now in terms of being off long-term sick. This is what you've got to do. This is when you need to get back to work by. And this is what's going to happen when you come back, and your place on the command process will be parked. And I said, well, I think we've got to accept the fact that I may never come back to work. In fact, walking is looking like it might be a challenge right now. And he was brilliant because he said, Emma, when you come back to work, this is what's going to happen. And he just believed it was going to happen. He was great.
Brilliant.
So did all of that. Ended up in hospital on a drip, which shut my immune system down and saved my life, basically. And came back to work the following January. And I was just told, as soon as you're ready to hit go with the command course, just let us know. So because I was impatient and I couldn't, I felt I had to prove that I was still a human, a capable, fit human. And I think I had to prove to myself that I hadn't lost it with flying as well. I did 2 things. Firstly, I took up exercise too quickly because prior to being ill, I had run and played tennis every day and swum a kilometre 3 times a week. And then after what we call jelly legs, the neurologist said to me, basically, it will take you 3 years to get back to full fitness. And I was like, no, it won't. Don't be so ridiculous. And I got in the pool and I couldn't even swim a length. And I thought, oh, maybe he's right. Maybe the man who's spent years of his life studying his specialist subject actually knows what he's talking about, And I cycled. I did a couple of big bike rides, one of them to Belgium without any training, and all the muscles in my body were weak, so it just knackered my back. But I just ignored the back pain and thought, right, I'll get the command course out of the way and then I'll sort my back out. which is absolutely the wrong thing to think. So I went on this command course, focusing on the wrong thing, and 3 sim sessions in, I failed the sim. And it was a dual hydraulics failure, which is something that I should have been able to do. And I passed the repeat the next day, but only just. And my instructor noticed that my back was, well, he noticed I was limping and asked me what was going on. And I said, well, yeah, my back's getting worse and all the rest of it. And the next morning I woke up in the hotel and I couldn't move. And I managed to sort of wiggle myself dressed, and it took me an hour to get downstairs for breakfast. Cool. At which point I met my instructor and said, you know, I can't continue with the course, don't you? And he said, well, I was going to say that yesterday, but, you know, you obviously needed to find out for yourself. And that was it. My part of the course was then parked, but not over. And that was another big mistake, because what I should have done is said, I clearly need to sort my body out. Can you just scrap the rest of the course for me and then recourse me in a few months' time when I'm all sorted? But it's easy to say that when you've been a captain and you know how to make command decisions and you know how to risk assess. When you're desperate to prove to yourself that you've still got it and you can still do it, and you're desperate to make sure that you achieve that goal that you've been working towards, you don't think like that. And actually, I don't think anybody suggested that to me either. I think everybody just let me run with it. So I went back on the course. I got my back sorted out. I was allowed to finish the course. I went back on, by which time all my course mates had been finishing their line training and got their commands and everything. And I had real first officers rather than trainee captains, which was actually really good. And it just got to the last sim, the LOE, and it was an E-slot sim, so it's 10 at night till 2 in the morning, with a really, really tricky failure, and I failed it. And I just didn't put the procedures into place that I needed to put into place. And once the first officer had gone home, the training captain, who is still a friend of mine and who I absolutely 100% didn't hold responsible for this at all, because he was trying to pass me, you know. And he just looked at me and he said, you know, I can't pass you for this. And I said, yeah, I know. I said, I just don't know what I'm going to do now, because I've completely messed it up and all the rest of it. And he was fabulous. And I drove home in tears at 2 in the morning, knowing that I just messed up the biggest thing of my entire career and failed something really for the first time in my life. So I'd failed the sim, but it was part of the same course. And got home. Jim was still awake when I got home. Well, he'd obviously woken up as I'd come in. He was really excited. He said, so did you pass, you captain? And I was like, no, I failed. And I spent the next quite a long time licking my wounds, actually. And then the kids came in the next morning and sort of let me sleep in and said, Mummy, I'm really sorry to hear about your command. I was like, thank you. And then they went, look at this puppy. Can we go and see it today? And I'm not kidding you. They were showing me pictures of a brown Labrador puppy wrapped up in a white towel. There was no time for navel gazing. It was like, look at this puppy. Isn't she really gorgeous? And we had lost a dog. Our 4-year-old lab had got cancer and died a few months earlier. So we had always said about getting another dog. And I'd said, not until I've finished my command course. And as far as they were concerned, it was the word finish that mattered, not the word pass.
Yes.
So as far as they were concerned, they were like, Mummy's finished her command now, let's go get a dog. And their minds moved on, which was probably quite good for me. But it was a really, really tricky time. And there were lots of things that I could have pointed to the company and said, well, you shouldn't have done it like this for me, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, the only thing I could do was to just accept responsibility for the fact that I had messed up. So, an E-slot sim wasn't ideal. The failure I was given wasn't ideal, and was one that most line captains were failing in their LOEs as well. So it was proof that there was more training needed. There were all sorts of things I could have pointed at, but the bottom line was it wasn't going to change the result. And I had to just pick myself up off the floor and say, yeah, that was me. I need to do better next time. And just hope there is a next time, because it is possible to fail a command course in such a way that you are not considered to be suitable as captain in that airline. And I know that can happen in lots of airlines. So, I sat back in the right-hand seat for another year, which was interesting in itself, because, I was standing in the crew room at Luton, which is where I was based at the time, with a training captain, with everybody knowing that I'd been on my command course, and everybody assuming that because I was standing with a training captain, I must be doing my line training for command. And they'd come up and congratulate me, and I had to just basically make it easier for them by laughing and saying, no, they decided they couldn't afford me in the end, so I'm going back in the right-hand seat for a bit. And, because otherwise it's just really uncomfortable for everyone else. And a year later, I went back and sailed through it and became a captain a year after I was expecting to. So it was a really big, very challenging time in my life. I nearly stopped flying because of it.
God, that's brilliant. So what does that mean in terms of your ability to be a good captain or a good human being, I suppose? How has that failure benefited you?
Massively, because I think that I was a much better captain in the end as a result of the fact that I knew I couldn't take it for granted. And I don't think I meant to take it for granted the first time round, but because I'd never failed anything before, I just don't think it ever occurred to me that I could. And because everything that I touched more or less had turned to gold in the past, so there was no reason why that would change now. But it gave me a much better appreciation of what it means to be a captain. And I think that, combined with the fact that I had nearly died a year earlier, taught me the humility that I think I needed. I didn't realise I needed it, but I think it just taught me to have a different perspective on life, and I was much more grateful and appreciative of everything around me as a result of the fact that I hadn't expected to even be there. So it just gave me a different view of what a good captain should be. And I think that really led on to, that was what allowed me to go on to set up the charity and do all the things I've done since. It was a big lesson that I had to take on board.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge of our current evolution, I suppose, is the fact that we still intrinsically see failure as something that we can't admit to. Or typical blokes, I think I repeat this all the time, blokes, as you probably well know, not very good at admitting we've got something wrong. It was part of our evolutionary process. So we needed basically to be, sod the rest of you, and I'm not going to admit it. I'm going to trample over everybody, because that's how we stayed alive, how we kept our community alive. And of course, that's very different now. It's causing us all sorts of problems. And I think to be able to admit where we've gone wrong is hugely beneficial. One of your big things that you talk about and is on your website is about your bucket, really. And for me, it's about, it's capacity, as you'll explain to us in a minute. But I think the more failures we have, and the more we think, actually, let's just own up to it, as you say, let's own up to the thing that's gone wrong, admit to our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and take responsibility for them. It increases that bucket of capacity. And it's just, for me, every time things have gone wrong, I've struggled to admit I'm wrong. I still do with my children. I have arguments with them and I walk away and think, oh, for God's sake, Ben, grow up and admit you're wrong to your own children. But it's so bloody hard. But then if I do, it's such a bloody relief. It really is. And I think, actually, I've now increased my bucket size and I can fit so many more bits and pieces in there and just enjoy life so much more. I can embrace the opportunities that I have. I can deal with all the natural turbulence that's going to hit us. And that sounds to me as though that's the message that you got from getting that significant thing wrong.
Yeah, very much so. And that doesn't mean that I I'm also very bad at, particularly with the children. I've got 3 children and one of them is very good at pushing my buttons.
Yeah.
And she would testify to the fact that, I'm not very good at admitting I'm wrong, especially when I'm talking to her. But eventually, I've learned to see things a different way, and I've just calmed down a bit. I think it's not about being right. It's about what you do with the things you get wrong, I think. And what was very interesting after I failed my command was so many of my male colleagues and lots of my female colleagues as well, but a lot of my male colleagues actually said to me quietly, not in front of other people, they would say, well, actually, I failed this and I failed that. And just so you know, that's happened to me. And actually, you realise that there is this culture of not being able to perhaps admit that you've got something wrong. But when given the opportunity, it's almost like it's created a safe space for people to be able to say, yeah, I've got things wrong too. And I think that's a real gift for people who just maybe needed to have that space to be able to do it. It's allowed people, because I didn't blame the company. I didn't lash out at the company. I didn't blame the instructor, the trainer. I took ownership of it for myself, and it allowed people to feel comfortable that if they said to me they'd failed something, they knew they weren't going to get judged for it, because I'd be like, well, I failed my command, so don't worry about what you've just done. And actually made it I'm not saying it's funny to fail your command, but actually you look back and you go, yeah, it was a bit stupid. So it just, I think laughing at yourself at something you've got wrong like that is a good, healthy way to deal with it, really.
Yeah, very much so. And there's various sayings, aren't there, that the only real mistakes we make in life are the ones we don't admit to. And that's where shame comes in. As you say, those guys, talking from a male point of view, is that it's such a hard thing to do. I played plenty of sports, and I coach now for the cricket team, for my son's under 15 cricket team. I have done recently with rugby, and often the really good, talented ones are the ones that blame all the external circumstances for things going wrong. If they've dropped a ball or they've been bowled out middle stump, they'll blame the umpire for not, saying that the bowler was bowling a no ball or whatever. It's, there's some condition, or the bat's wrong, or his pads are in the wrong place. And they're motivated by the fear of failure, but they're also intrinsically held back because they don't want to be the source of how they fail. And this is what I'm trying to impart, certainly on the male guys. I think girls are a bit better, but they don't have the confidence to give things a go in the first place. So we all have our challenges. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, if we can avoid the whole shame thing, which leads to denial, of confirmation bias, of subconscious bias and all the rest of it, and actually just say, I got this wrong, but it's going to be an incredible opportunity for me. And then I'm going to set the example for other people. And I would say for you, in our airline environment, those guys must have been so relieved for you to be standing in that crew room with a smile on your face, making fun of the fact that you got something wrong, because they thought, wow, she's actually got it right now and she's gone on to learn it. I mean, that's hugely inspirational, I'd say. And it just, I think, for me, that leads on to the fact that, we don't need to be second best to each other. There's all this talk about, excuse me, of toxic masculinity and patriarchy and all the rest of it. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier. Then the women can feel as though they've been victimized, and there's too much discussion on the fact that women. I think that women have been kept down too long, and we're finding excuses. So actually, we're at the end of the day, let's just set that example. It doesn't matter whether we're girls, boys, black, white, English, French, or whatever. Anyway, we're all human beings. We come from the ground. We're soil. So if we got something wrong, we're all completely individual. Let's fess up to it. There's nothing shameful about it. And let's work out how we put it right. And there is so much resource out there. There's so many people out there to support. But classic bloke thing is to isolate, is just hide away and pretend. And then, of course, the statistics for suicide, as we've talked about, this is another area of interest, both of us, point out to the fact that there's an incredibly long line, even to the fact that you take your own life. And I think we've got to address the masculine, feminine side of things, the way we've been conditioned, the way we've been socialized for all those years, and all the chemicals that are going on in our brain. And I think for me, just to reiterate what we talked about before, is that you've worked out this really beneficial way of understanding your female side and your male side, and you're setting an incredibly good example outside of aviation. We'll talk about the Project Wingman in a minute, but I would say, yeah, that's the thing for me.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and I think that I think you're giving me a lot of credit for something that has just happened, really, because I've not sort of I've not really thought about it too much. I've just tried to learn how to become, for me, the best mother I can be, the best wife I can be, the best daughter I can be. And that's come before the best pilot I can be and all the rest of it. The person I am has got to be more important than what it is I do. And I think, leaving EasyJet in 2020 really helped me with that in some ways, because I kind of thought, well, if I'm not Captain Emma anymore, who am I? And I'd already gone through that when we'd moved to New Zealand. I had been my dad's daughter. He was a big fish in a small pond. And then I was Jim's wife, and then I was the children's mother. And at 30, I moved to New Zealand, and I was like, yeah, but who am I? Nobody knew who I was there. Nobody knew my past or anything. So it's like, well, who am I then? And I found out that actually I found out that I didn't. Firstly, I don't care if you're a man or a woman. I grew up, most of my friends in my home. So I didn't have a lot of friends at school, because I had a lot of, all my sort of friendship group was in my hometown. I grew up in a very strong church, actually. And so all my friends were from the youth group or the girls' brigade or whatever it was I was doing around that. And a lot of them were guys. And I just didn't. And I had a brother and no sisters. So I grew up in quite to me, boys are people you're friends with. It didn't occur to me that boys would be anything else, that I wouldn't be equal to them. I'd go and roll around in the piles of grass at the rugby club and throw stuff at each other with the best of them. And all the girls did that. It wasn't that I was a tomboy. That's just what we did. We used to all go and muck around together in the playing fields, and, we would all put like strapped roller skates to our trainers and go and fall over in the park. It was never a case of the girls did this and the boys did that. So I think that, I've always had a very equal view of people. I didn't grow up in a house that was particularly, in some ways it was quite stereotypical, because my dad would go out to work in London, but my mum also worked. And there was 100% an expectation that my dad would take a part in the work that went on around having a house and having a family and stuff. And it's the same in my house. I don't do the ironing in my house, because my husband went to Cranwell and was taught how to do it. So why the hell would I pick up an iron when he's a professional at it?
Yeah.
But equally, I cut the grass. So it's not about boy jobs and girl jobs. It's about who's got the time to do it and who's able to do it. And, so I think that's why when I went into flying, it just never occurred to me that there would be any barriers to me. And it still doesn't really occur to me that your gender would be a barrier to anything you want to do.
No. And I think that is exactly the message we need now in modern society, modern community. Really, we're all in the pot together. We've got to find something that we can contribute to the benefit of humanity as a whole. And each one of us are individual, independent. It doesn't matter what identity we think we have. It's actually what, how we're going to contribute. I think the question for me is that I have flown with very few female pilots, and actually the last time was, I think probably in the airline when I was with Thompson. But I often find it really interesting, and I find it very difficult, because I fly with men who, if they're underconfident, they need to be the captain all the time. So it's slightly unique in my niche area of VIP flying, is that we fly gulfstreams, and most of the billionaires that we fly for just want captains. So we are put together. So for the last, I've flown with a few first officers, but mainly captains. And it's really interesting that I would say the last two operations particularly, that I've played the second role, because the other guys need to be the captain. And I'm happy with that, really. It doesn't make me feel any smaller. And I've learned to keep my mouth shut and just to let that happen. It's interesting. So for you as a female pilot in that situation, how have you dealt with some of the male egos that find it very difficult not to be in charge and not to be in control?
Well, it's funny, really, because so I never had a situation when I was a captain where I was flying with anyone that would I didn't even have any. The only day out I had that was slightly challenging with the first officer when I was a captain was actually with a female first officer who just seemed to have to. She just seemed to be quite angry about a lot of things, and I think was probably very underconfident. And it was quite a difficult day out as a result. But when I was a first officer at Stansted, there were a number of characters there. And there was one character in particular who I had been warned about flying with. And I kind of thought, well, I was kind of lucky when I started at Stansted anyway, because I was already in my late 30s. I'd already got 3 kids. We had a mortgage. So I had the same experiences that a lot of the captains were going through as well. So, I wasn't coming in as a 22-year-old who had completely different interests. We all kind of thought the same way. So when I was rostered to fly with this particular captain, I just thought, well, I don't think that, everybody always knew how much I liked to eat when I was flying. And even on Inside the Cockpit, there were comments on Twitter about, does she ever stop eting? And the answer, according to my scales recently, is clearly no. But but so I just always took a packet of biscuits or some chocolate or something with me, because I always took my own food with me, because crew food was not only rubbish, well, it was just rubbish and bad for you. Yeah. So I always took my own food with me, and I'd always taken a pack of biscuits. And on this particular day, I went through to the terminal and went to somewhere like Pret and bought a couple of gingerbread men, because I thought, well, clearly the way to stop this man from being difficult to fly with is to feed him. So I turned up at the briefing table with a gingerbread man for him, and he was just like putty. And then he found out where my children went to school, and then he had a friend who had been at that school, and we just found all this mutual common ground. So we went and had a really great day out, and I became friends with him, and I realised that the reason that he had that reputation is because he actually was a little bit underconfident he was a really good pilot, he just wasn't a very confident captain. He was a very competent captain, but he just wasn't confident. So he tried to instill that confidence in his abilities in other people by sort of being a bit of a bossy, sort of unengaging kind of. He was basically, he'd sit in the flight deck and command, and he would never come out and engage with the cabin crew even on a turnaround or anything. And I'm not like that. I used to spend a lot of time in the cabin talking to the crew, particularly on a turnaround, or just making sure that they were being seen as people and not just inconveniences that happened to be the other side of the bulletproof door. So and we had a great day out, and he did soften and he mellowed a bit. And I think quite often the reputation people get is not always their own fault. Sometimes it can be given to them by perhaps slightly overconfident first officers who just don't get it. If you're flying with someone who's in their late 50s and you're 20 and you don't know how to have that relationship with them, then I can see why he got that reputation, but it was not deserved. And so I just basically handled that by feeding people mainly. It's hard to be stroppy if you're being force-fed biscuits, isn't it?
It's very true. Yeah, as they say, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And yeah, I definitely get that. I definitely have lots. I was brought up with a lot of girls in my family, sisters galore, and mums and stepmums and stuff like that. And yeah, I was always patted on the back for being good little Benny when I scoffed my food and asked for seconds, because it made them feel good. So I know exactly how you feel. But for me, that's really the central message is what we talk about now as emotional intelligence, isn't it? Is that you read the situation there. You didn't go in there all guns blazing and trying to punch to try and control the situation, which is what people who try to control through authority is, because of a lack of confidence. It's a fear-based, I need to control. It's the autonomic nervous system saying, right, let's kick into the fight and fly here, shut down the capacity for other parts to operate efficiently. And I think that's the problem now. Men are still struggling with emotional intelligence very much so. I think our kids are not being educated or encouraged to develop social and emotional learning. There are the kind of life skills projects, but when I talk to my children, I think the teachers don't really have much understanding. They're not really invested in it, and it should be an absolutely central part to starting from the young age. And that's for you, bringing that into the cockpit. Apart from everything you do in your life, is really essential. We need to be promoting this. So that was part one of my wonderful conversation with Emma. We have so much to talk to that I decided to split it up into 2 parts. The next one's coming out exactly a week today. But if you've got any thoughts about what we were talking about, please leave them in the box below. It makes all the difference. It helps us to spread the message of how we support each other and humanity generally. Until next week, I wish you all the very best, and please remember to keep it in the greens.